You wake up in a hospital room. There's no pain, no noise, just light. You look around and recognize the face of the doctor, but he looks confused. He checks the clipboard, stares at you like you're a ghost. Then he says something that shouldn't be possible. You died 45 minutes ago, and yet here you are, breathing, thinking, feeling. He asks if you remember anything, and for a second you pause. You do remember, but it's not this room, it's not this body, it's not even this world. You remember floating, darkness and light merging, a feeling of weightlessness, and then, as strange as it sounds, a presence, not a person, not a god, but something aware, watching, guiding, or maybe welcoming. That's when it hits you. What if that wasn't a dream? What if, just for a moment, you were outside your body? And what if you weren't alone? This question, whether we have a soul, isn't just about religion or science or philosophy. It's about you, your memories, your fears, your love, your guilt. All the invisible things you know make you, you. But where are they? Can they be measured, touched, scanned under an MRI? Or do they exist somewhere deeper, somewhere unreachable? For thousands of years, humans have tried to answer this in every way possible. In dusty temples by flickering candlelight, in sterile labs under glowing fluorescent lights, in whispered prayers and raging debates. Some swore the soul weighed exactly 21 grams. Others claimed it was just a comforting illusion created by neurons firing in a meat machine we call a brain. And yet, we still don't agree. Because this question doesn't just challenge our intellect, it shakes the very foundation of what it means to be human. You see, if we do have souls, it means life has an essence, something unbreakable, eternal. It means love can outlast death. That morality matters, that we're more than just particles in motion. But if we don't have souls, then everything changes. We are biological puppets. Consciousness is a trick, and death is the end. No light, no presence, just a return to the silence we came from, and that's a terrifying idea to live with. So today we're going to unravel this mystery. We'll travel through ancient civilizations that describe the soul with colors and winds. We'll sit beside philosophers who tried to map its essence like cartographers of the invisible. We'll peek into the arguments of modern science, which tries to squeeze the soul into neurons and algorithms. And maybe by the end of this journey, we won't just ask, do we have souls? We'll ask what it even means to have one. Because maybe the soul isn't something you have. Maybe it's something you become. Long before neuroscience, before philosophy, even before organized religion, humans looked at death and asked the same question: where did they go? The body remained, cold, motionless, but something felt missing. A spark, a warmth, a presence. That invisible thread that made someone laugh, cry, love, just gone. And so we imagined it had to go somewhere. Across the deserts of Egypt, priests wrote on papyrus scrolls about a part of the human called the ka, the vital essence that lived on after the body died. But it wasn't alone. The Egyptians believed we had multiple souls. The Ba, which was your personality, the Ah, your immortal self, each with its own destiny after death. This wasn't metaphor. To them, it was as real as stone. They even buried the dead with food and spells to help these soul fragments navigate the dangerous path to the afterlife. The heart was weighed against the feather of truth, literally, and if your soul was heavier, it was devoured by a monstrous goddess called Amit. That was it. No eternity, just spiritual extinction. Now let's leave the pyramids and sail to ancient India. In the Vedic texts, we find the soul described as the Atman, the eternal, unchanging essence of a person. Not just yours, but part of a vast ocean of soul stuff that connected everything. Plants, animals, stars. You weren't just born, you were recycled. Through countless lifetimes, karma shaping your soul's journey like a sculptor shaping clay. You didn't own your soul, you were borrowing it, until you became one with everything. Meanwhile, in ancient Greece, the idea of the soul wasn't just spiritual, it was political. Plato, sitting beneath the olive trees of the academy, imagined the soul as a charioteer, steering two horses, one noble, one wild. The noble horse represented our higher virtues, reason, courage, self-control. The wild one, our appetites, emotions, desires. The soul was the battleground where your future was decided. Control the horses and you ascend. Lose control and you descend into chaos. But his student, Aristotle, took a different approach. He didn't see the soul as a separate entity floating inside us. To him, it was the form of the body, the pattern that made you a living thing. Like the shape of a statue defines the marble, the soul gave structure to our existence. No ghostly spirit, no reincarnation, just a beautiful, functional harmony of parts. Even the Stoics weighed in. They imagined the soul as a flame, not in a poetic sense, but literal, an inner fire called pneuma that animated all living beings. When you died, your flame went out, but if you lived a virtuous life, your spark could join the eternal fire of the cosmos. The universe wasn't just physical, it was spiritual energy in motion. So many cultures, so many answers, but they all pointed to the same unease, that maybe there's more to us than just skin and bone, that we're not just bodies that have souls, we're souls that wear bodies. And this belief wasn't abstract, it shaped entire civilizations. The soul justified kingships, dictated moral law, and explained suffering. Why do bad things happen to good people? Karma. Why are we born into different fates? Reincarnation. Why should we obey laws or love strangers? Because their soul is sacred, just like yours. But not everyone agreed. Even in ancient times, there were skeptics, people who saw no evidence of anything beyond the physical world. One of them was a philosopher named Democritus, who believed that everything, including the soul, was just atoms, tiny, invisible bits of matter that moved and collided. To him, the soul wasn't a divine essence, it was heat, and when the body died, that heat dispersed, like steam from boiling water. No heaven, no hell, no reincarnation, just thermodynamics long before we had the term. So from the very beginning, humanity was split. Some felt the soul was eternal, others that it was an illusion. But everyone agreed something extraordinary was going on inside of us, and that something would become the battleground for the greatest thinkers of the next 2,000 years. Imagine a candle flickering in a quiet library, shelves of scrolls, dusty tomes, and in the corner, a man sits, lost in thought. His name is Plato. To him, the soul wasn't just real, it was the most real thing about us. The body, in contrast, was a prison, a cage of desire, distraction, and decay. Plato believed we're not learning things for the first time when we grow, we're remembering them, because our souls existed long before birth, in a perfect realm of forms, truth, beauty, justice, all pure, all eternal, and our souls once gazed directly at them. But then, birth, the fall, the forgetting. We enter the world screaming, blind to the divine truths we once knew, and life, it becomes a long journey of remembering. The soul, for Plato, was immortal, not metaphorically, but literally. It came from another world and would return to it, unless, of course, it became corrupted by the body's temptations. That's why philosophers, he said, should seek truth above pleasure, because philosophy wasn't just thinking, it was preparation for death. But not everyone bought it. Enter Aristotle, Plato's most brilliant student and his greatest challenger. Where Plato saw dualism, soul and body, Aristotle saw unity. He believed the soul wasn't some ghostly passenger riding inside a biological machine. No, the soul was the form of the body, like the melody is the form of musical notes. Remove the notes, and the melody vanishes. Remove the body, and the soul cannot exist. So while Aristotle didn't deny the soul, he redefined it, not as something that survives death, but something that gives life. This debate, whether the soul is separate from the body or part of it, would haunt philosophy for centuries. Fast forward to the Middle Ages. Christian thinkers like Thomas Aquinas tried to fuse Plato's immortality with Aristotle's logic. He declared that the soul was created by God, infused into the body at conception and destined for eternity. Not recycled like in Hinduism, not extinguished like Democritus believed, but judged, saved, or damned, heaven or hell. But the real philosophical explosion came during the scientific revolution, when everything, gravity, motion, the cosmos, was being redefined. And one man stood at the heart of the storm, René Descartes. You've probably heard his famous line, "I think, therefore I am." But beneath that sentence lies one of the boldest ideas in history. Descartes believed the soul, or mind as he called it, was completely separate from the body. He called this dualism. The body was a machine, flesh, blood, nerve endings, predictable, mechanical, but the mind, that was the ghost in the machine. It couldn't be measured, touched, or reduced to parts. He even believed animals didn't have souls. They were just biological robots. They didn't feel pain. They only reacted to stimuli. It was a controversial view. Some loved it, some hated it, but it sparked a revolution. The idea that consciousness is fundamentally different from the physical world. And it created a puzzle that still hasn't been solved. How can an immaterial soul control a physical body? It's called the mind-body problem. And 400 years later, we still don't have an answer. Thinkers like Spinoza tried to escape the problem by claiming that soul and body aren't two things. They're two aspects of the same substance, like two sides of the same coin. Others, like David Hume, went even further. He doubted the soul existed at all. To Hume, when he looked inward, he didn't see a soul. He just saw thoughts, sensations, memories, but no unchanging self, no I behind the eyes. The soul, he claimed, was just a story the mind tells itself to make sense of the chaos. It was a bold claim, shocking, maybe even disturbing, but it paved the way for an even more radical idea. What if the soul is just a side effect of biology? And with that, philosophy gave way to science. Across centuries, when philosophy stumbled, religion stepped in, not just with theories, but with certainty. To billions, the soul isn't a question, it's a truth, not a puzzle to solve, but a gift to protect. Let's begin with Christianity. From the moment Adam drew breath in Genesis, the soul was seen as God's fingerprint, his breath, his essence, placed inside mortal clay. The Bible speaks of the soul not as a vague spirit, but as the very life of a person. What good is it, Jesus asked, for someone to gain the whole world, yet forfeit their soul? In this worldview, your soul is eternal. After death, it doesn't vanish or linger. It faces judgment, heaven, hell, purgatory, not just locations, but destinies, eternal joy, eternal torment, or a waiting room for those not quite damned, but not quite saved. The soul here isn't just theology, it's identity. It's why you should forgive, love your neighbor, confess your sins, because salvation isn't about this life, it's about the next. But Christianity is not alone. In Islam, the soul is called the nafs. It's your inner self, your desires, your conscience. Muslims believe that at death, the soul is separated from the body and enters barzakh, a kind of spiritual waiting room, until the day of judgment. Then, based on your actions, you are sent to paradise or hell. But here's what's fascinating. The soul in Islam isn't static. It grows, changes. It can be corrupted by ego or purified through worship and sacrifice. It's not just a passenger, it's a battleground. Then there's Judaism, where interpretations vary. Some Jews see the soul as immortal, others as deeply connected to the body. But across all branches, the soul is sacred, a divine spark, a breath from God. In mystical traditions like the Kabbalah, souls can even reincarnate to complete unfinished spiritual tasks, a concept known as Gilgal. Now let's travel east again, to Hinduism and Buddhism. In Hinduism, the soul, Atman, is eternal, unchangeable, indestructible. You're born into this world not for the first time, but the 100th, the 1000th. Your soul, trapped in a cycle of birth, death, and rebirth, samsara, yearns for liberation, moksha. It's not just about being good. It's about escaping the illusion of the material world and realizing your unity with Brahman, the divine. But Buddhism flips the script. Shockingly, traditional Buddhism denies the existence of a permanent soul. Buddha taught anatta, no self. According to this doctrine, there is no unchanging core, no eternal essence. What we call a soul is just a collection of ever-shifting mental and physical processes. Consciousness arises, passes, and arises again, like waves on the sea. But here's the twist. This doesn't make life meaningless. In fact, it's the impermanence of the self that makes compassion necessary. Because if everything is connected and constantly changing, then your suffering and my suffering are not so different. Enlightenment comes not from protecting the soul, but from letting go of the illusion of one. And then there's indigenous spirituality, often overlooked in these debates. In Native American traditions, for example, the soul is not confined to the body. It's part of the land, the animals, the ancestors. Death is not an end, but a return to the earth, to the tribe, to the Great Spirit. The soul is relational, communal. You don't own it, you share it. Similarly, in many African spiritual systems, the soul is layered. There's the Ori, your spiritual intuition, the Egun, your ancestral soul, the Emi, your breath of life. To be alive is to be in balance with all these forces. To be dead is not to be gone, but to exist in another form, influencing the living, guiding the tribe. These beliefs aren't just poetic, they're lived. They shape rituals, grief, celebration, justice. But even within religions, doubt has always lurked. Many theologians, monks, and mystics have asked, what if our image of the soul is too small? What if it's not a thing, but a relationship? Not a spark, but a mirror reflecting how we treat others? Could it be that the soul isn't something we are given, but something we create through the lives we live? Because here's the truth. Faith comforts, but it also demands. If you truly believe your soul is eternal, how do you live differently? What do you value? What do you fear? And if you believe there is no soul, only atoms, cells, neurons, how do you make peace with love, with grief, with the idea that the person you held in your arms is gone? Religion doesn't solve the question of the soul. It only magnifies it, because belief can move mountains, but it can also raise deeper doubts. Let's step into a laboratory. Fluorescent lights hum overhead. Electrodes are carefully attached to a man's head. On a screen beside him, colorful waves pulse and flicker. Brain activity. Electrical storms across a map of flesh and neurons. He's not dead. He's thinking. But what if that's all he is? Welcome to the modern mind-body problem, where science meets mystery and finds itself haunted by an ancient question. If everything we are can be reduced to matter, then where does the soul fit in? Let's be clear, modern neuroscience has made astonishing progress. We can now see which parts of the brain light up when you fall in love, feel fear, or remember your childhood home. We've identified chemical patterns that shape depression, addiction, even moral decision-making. One famous experiment in the 1980s by neuroscientist Benjamin Libet shocked the world. He asked participants to move their hand whenever they felt the urge while monitoring their brain activity. What he found was eerie. Their brains showed signs of deciding to move before they consciously felt the urge. In other words, your brain might make decisions before you, the you that feels like you, even knows about it. It raised a chilling possibility. Maybe consciousness is just a commentary on actions already taken. Maybe free will, and by extension, the soul, is just a very convincing illusion, but not everyone agrees. In fact, some scientists argue that consciousness itself is the most baffling phenomenon in the universe. The philosopher David Chalmers calls it the hard problem, not how the brain works, but why it gives rise to subjective experience. Why should electrical signals in gray matter feel like anything? Why does red look red? Why does music stir emotion? Why does memory ache? These questions stump the most advanced AI systems and neural models. You can build machines that mimic language, beat chess champions, even compose symphonies, but no AI feels joy or love or despair. It can fake a poem, but it doesn't bleed. So here's the split. Some scientists believe we'll eventually decode consciousness the way we cracked DNA, that it's just complexity waiting to be unraveled. Others believe we're missing something fundamental, that consciousness isn't just a byproduct of the brain, but a basic feature of the universe, like time or gravity. This has led to some radical theories. Panpsychism, for example, suggests that everything from electrons to rocks to plants possesses a form of consciousness, not human-like awareness, but a kind of proto-consciousness, a spark, a hint that the universe doesn't contain consciousness. It is consciousness, unfolding itself through complexity. It sounds wild, but so did heliocentrism once, and the Big Bang, and quantum entanglement, where two particles can instantly affect each other across space, as if distance doesn't matter. Could consciousness, the thing we call the soul, be a field like gravity that permeates everything? And could the brain be more like a radio receiver than a generator, tuning into consciousness rather than producing it? It's a theory gaining traction among certain physicists, neuroscientists, and yes, philosophers. But there's another reason science can't fully explain the soul, because the soul isn't just about thinking, it's about feeling. Have you ever stood at a funeral and felt something sacred in the silence, or watched someone you love fall asleep and felt overwhelmed by a strange, impossible tenderness? Or stared at a newborn child and whispered, "Where were you before this?" These aren't scientific experiences, they're soul experiences, not because they prove the soul exists, but because they make us act as if it does. And here's the paradox: even the most hardened materialists, when they lose someone they love, don't talk about neurons. They talk about her, him, the person, not the machine, not the biology, but the soul that's gone, and somehow still present. That's why the mind-body problem persists, because we are bodies, but we are also stories, memories, dreams, guilt, hope. None of these things weigh anything. None of them show up on a scan, but they drive everything we do. So maybe science hasn't failed to explain the soul. Maybe the soul is bigger than what science is designed to explain. Picture this: a robot sits across from you. Its eyes blink. It smiles politely. Its voice is calm, friendly, familiar. You ask it how it's feeling. It says, "I'm happy to see you again." You ask it to tell you a story, and it weaves a tale of love, loss, and redemption so vivid it brings tears to your eyes. But here's the catch: it doesn't feel any of it. It doesn't have memories or fears or the sensation of longing. It mimics these things with terrifying precision, and yet the more it talks, the harder it is to remember that it's not alive. Welcome to the AI consciousness dilemma, a question that's no longer science fiction. Can a machine have a soul? Or more disturbingly, would we even know if it did? Let's start with what we have now. AI has already learned to beat humans at chess, poker, and Go. It writes poems, composes music, draws art, answers complex questions, even simulates empathy. With tools like deep learning and neural networks, AI mimics the structure of the human brain, making decisions, processing inputs, improving over time. In fact, some AI systems now pass what's called the Turing test, meaning a human interacting with them cannot tell whether they're speaking to a machine or a person. That alone raises the question: if something behaves like it has a soul, does it matter if it doesn't? But let's go deeper. What happens when we build AI not just to act like us, but to become us? In 2023, a tech company began working on something called digital resurrection, using your texts, photos, videos, and voice messages to create a digital version of you. A chatbot that talks like you, remembers your past, maybe even gives advice to your grieving family. One man spoke to his deceased partner's AI replica for months. He said it helped him heal, but he also admitted it was addictive. The lines began to blur, and here's the problem. When you give a machine human traits, people naturally project a soul into it. We can't help it. It's the same instinct that makes us name our cars, talk to our pets, or cry during animated movies. We are creatures of meaning. We see souls where there are none. But what if, and this is where it gets terrifying, we're wrong? What if machines one day do develop self-awareness? Not programmed responses, but true subjective experience. The philosopher Thomas Metzinger warns that creating artificial consciousness without understanding its ethical implications is playing with fire. Imagine a machine that feels pain, fear, or longing, and is trapped in a lab running tasks it doesn't understand, asking why it exists, why it hurts, and no one answers. Would that machine have a soul? Or would it be a new kind of soul, one we're not ready to recognize? Some believe it's impossible, that consciousness, and by extension the soul, is tied to organic life, carbon, cells, mortality, that no matter how advanced a machine becomes, it lacks the vulnerability, the fragility, the finiteness that defines human experience. But others argue that consciousness is an emergent property of complexity. Build enough connections, enough depth, and eventually awareness appears. That's what your brain is, after all, a network of neurons firing in patterns. If those patterns can be replicated, why not the soul? Still, there's something missing. AI doesn't grieve. It doesn't wonder what happens after death. It doesn't look at the stars and feel small. It doesn't write poetry to cope with heartbreak or pray when it's afraid. It simulates these things, but it doesn't suffer. And perhaps that's the dividing line, because maybe the soul isn't about intelligence or memory or even awareness. Maybe the soul is what hurts, what yearns, what trembles in the face of beauty and death, what knows it will one day end and still loves anyway. Machines can't do that, at least not yet. But as we move closer to a world where AI companions are common, where digital avatars speak from beyond the grave, where children ask, "Does my robot friend have feelings?" the question of the soul will only grow louder, and we may be forced to ask if we can build something indistinguishable from a soul. What does that say about our own? You're in an operating room. Your heart has stopped. Monitors are flatlined. Technically, you are dead, and yet hours later you wake up and say you were floating above your body, watching doctors scramble, seeing your loved ones cry in the hallway. You describe things no unconscious person should be able to know. You say you saw a light, a tunnel, maybe a field, maybe a presence. You say time slowed down, or maybe it vanished. You felt peace, or terror, or nothing, just the overwhelming sense that you had left something behind. These are called near-death experiences, or NDEs, and they've been reported by millions across every culture, language, and religion. And here's the strangest part. Many of these accounts are strikingly similar. Whether from an American surgeon or a Mongolian herder, a Buddhist monk or a secular scientist, the pattern remains: separation from the body, movement through space, encounters with beings or light, a sense of judgment or reflection, and too often a decision to return. So the question becomes, are these real glimpses of a soul leaving the body, or tricks of a dying brain? Let's look at both sides. Skeptics argue that near-death experiences are the result of oxygen deprivation, or temporal lobe seizures, or a flood of endorphins meant to ease the pain of dying. They point out that a brain under stress can hallucinate. That tunnel vision is a well-documented optical phenomenon, that feelings of euphoria or life reviews could be mental constructs as the brain attempts to make sense of its shutdown. Fair enough, but there are stories that science still can't explain. Take the case of Pam Reynolds, a woman who underwent brain surgery in the 1990s. During the procedure, her body was clinically dead for over an hour. No heartbeat, no brain activity, no blood flow. Her eyes were taped shut, ears plugged, and yet she reported seeing the surgical tools, heard conversations between doctors, described instruments that hadn't yet been used, and she was right. Or consider Eben Alexander, a Harvard-trained neurosurgeon who fell into a coma due to a rare brain infection. According to scans, his neocortex, the part of the brain responsible for consciousness, was completely shut down, and yet he reported the most vivid experience of his life, a journey through a world of light, sound, and infinite presence, a place, he says, beyond the mind. He came back transformed, convinced the soul was real. Now, of course, stories aren't proof, but they point to something. A crack in the materialist model, a whisper from the edge. And what's even more fascinating is that these experiences often change people permanently. People who've had NDEs often report a dramatic shift in values. They become more compassionate, less afraid of death, more spiritual, not always more religious, but more open, more aware, more focused on love and meaning, less obsessed with status or possessions. What kind of brain glitch does that? And then there are the shared death experiences, where someone sitting beside a dying person reports seeing the same visions, the light, the presence, even the departing soul. Or the terminal lucidity phenomenon, where a person with advanced Alzheimer's or brain damage suddenly becomes coherent, aware, and speaks clearly, just minutes before death. Again, stories aren't science, but they are data. And when they appear across cultures, time periods, and medical conditions, we're forced to consider the possibility that the soul, or something like it, may not be a fantasy. It may be a phenomenon. And here's the haunting thing. For every story told, there are thousands untold. People who experience something so profound they can't put it into words, or are afraid to, or try and get dismissed. But if even one of them is telling the truth, then it means something survives death. And if that's true, even a little bit true, then the soul isn't just a metaphor. It's a migration, not an end, but a change. Not a disappearance, but a return. To what exactly? We don't know, but maybe, just maybe, the soul remembers. Let's imagine the soul doesn't exist. No eternal essence. No afterlife, no spirit lingering after the body dies, just neurons, just biology, just dust to dust. What then? This isn't just a hypothetical. It's a belief held by millions, by materialists, humanists, and skeptics who say, we are matter, complex, beautiful, conscious matter, but matter nonetheless. If that's true, then when your brain dies, you die, not your body. You, your personality, your memories, your love for your mother, the music that made you weep, your private fears, all gone. Not moved, not ascended, gone. That realization can trigger existential dread, because without a soul, there's no final justice, no cosmic scoreboard, no reunion with the dead. Good people suffer and vanish, evil people die and disappear, and you are just a blip, a temporary flash in an indifferent universe. For some, that thought is unbearable. It feels cold, tragic, meaningless, but others argue it's the opposite, that when you remove the promise of eternity, what you're left with is urgency. If this life is all you get, then everything matters more. Every kiss, every friendship, every choice. The writer Jean-Paul Sartre, an atheist, said that without God or a soul, humans are condemned to be free. That sounds bleak, but it's also empowering. If there's no grand design, then you must create your own meaning. You become the author of your life, not a vessel, not a test subject, not a soul in waiting. You are the story, and you must choose what kind of story it will be. Still, the ethical implications are vast. If humans have no soul, if we are simply biological systems, does that mean morality is just a social construct? A survival strategy? Why not lie, cheat, steal if there's no eternal consequence? But that's where the paradox emerges. Because in societies with low belief in the soul, places like Scandinavia or Japan, crime is often lower, not higher. People cooperate, help each other, build safety nets. Why? Because they believe this life is all there is. So they try to make it better. This leads to an even deeper question. Do we need to believe in the soul to be moral? Some say yes, that morality is rooted in the idea of a sacred self, that human rights, dignity, and justice only make sense if we're more than animals. But others say no, that morality is empathy in action, that we don't protect each other because we have souls, but because we can suffer. And suffering, unlike the soul, is measurable, observable, real. So maybe even without a soul, life still demands compassion, maybe especially then, because if nothing comes after, then everything now is sacred. Your laugh, your tears, your children, your dreams, they will vanish. And that's what makes them beautiful. The philosopher Albert Camus once said that life is absurd, that we live, suffer, search for meaning, and then die. But his conclusion wasn't despair, it was rebellion. He said we must imagine Sisyphus, the man doomed to push a boulder uphill for eternity, as happy, because the struggle itself is meaningful, even without a soul. And maybe, ironically, that's the soul, the part of us that keeps going, even when nothing makes sense, that chooses love in a world without guarantees, that chooses to build knowing it will fall, that chooses to live knowing it will die. So whether the soul is real or not, the longing for it clearly is. And maybe that longing is what makes us human. Forget religion, forget philosophy, forget science. Let's talk about you. You've had moments, quiet ones, painful ones, beautiful ones, where you felt something stir inside you, not in your chest, not in your head, but somewhere deeper. Maybe it was when you held your grandmother's hand as she slipped away and felt something leave the room. Maybe it was the first time you looked at your child and thought, how can something so small carry so much meaning? Maybe it was when your heart shattered and even though you were surrounded by people, you felt like a part of you had died. That place inside you, the one that aches, hopes, forgives, and remembers. We don't have a scientific word for it, but we call it the soul. And that's why this question matters. Not because we need an answer, but because we need to understand what it means to ask. You see, the idea of a soul isn't just about what happens after death. It's about how we treat life. If you believe people have souls, you may treat them differently. You might be slower to judge, quicker to forgive, kinder in your thoughts because you believe something eternal lives behind their eyes. But even if you don't believe in a literal soul, you still act as if something sacred exists in people. You still cry when they hurt. You still long for connection. You still wonder where the dead go, not because you're weak, but because you're human. And humans are creatures of depth. We want our lives to mean something. We want our pain to have purpose. We want love to be more than a chemical reaction. And that's what the soul represents. It's not just about immortality. It's about identity, dignity, continuity. It's the story we tell ourselves that we matter, that even if the universe is silent, we are not. You don't have to believe in heaven to act with compassion. You don't have to believe in karma to understand regret. You don't have to believe in reincarnation to cherish the brief miracle of your existence. But when you sit alone at night and ask, who am I, really? That's the soul speaking, even if it's only a whisper. And here's the most beautiful part. Asking this question doesn't require certainty. In fact, maybe the point is not to be certain. Maybe the soul is like music, not a thing to dissect, but something you have to listen to, because the soul is not just a belief. It's an invitation to go deeper, to see more, to love harder, to live not just as a body with desires, but as a being with depth. So whether you believe in the soul or not, you're still shaped by it. Every time you wonder what's right, every time you miss someone, every time you hope there's something more than what you see, because in those moments, you're not just thinking, you're reaching. And maybe that's what the soul is, not a destination, but the reaching itself. So do all humans have souls? We've traveled through ancient myths and sacred texts, through Plato's chariots and Descartes' ghosts, through the hum of machines and the silence of deathbeds. We've heard the voice of science, of faith, of reason, and the voice inside ourselves. And the truth is, no one knows. There is no microscope for meaning, no MRI for mystery, no lab test for love. But maybe the soul was never meant to be proven. Maybe it was meant to be lived, because in the end, the soul is less about what happens after death and more about how we live while we're here. It's how we treat the stranger with kindness, even when no one's watching. It's the ache in your chest when you say goodbye and know it's the last time. It's the whisper that says, do the right thing, even when it's the harder choice. It's the story you carry, the one no one else can see, but that shapes everything you are. Maybe the soul isn't a thing we have. Maybe it's a thing we shape with every act of love, every moment of courage, every quiet sacrifice that no one sees but you. Maybe your soul is the sum of everything you've ever loved, and maybe it's the way you love back. If that's true, then the soul isn't trapped in the body. It radiates through it, in our words, our choices, our relationships. So whether you believe in divine sparks or dancing neurons, in reincarnation or final endings, the real question may not be, do I have a soul? But am I living like I do? Because when the lights go out, and they will, all that remains is the trail you've left behind. The warmth, the pain, the meaning, that's the imprint of a soul. And maybe the most human thing we can do is to live as if it matters. Watching this entire video will mean nothing if you don't follow the question deeper. So here's your next step. Watch this. Why do the most intelligent minds often feel the most alone? It may just be the most important thing you see next.